Good morning, everybody. That is the still quiet waters off of Ballycastle, Northern Ireland, where I am this week. And oops, sorry about the lighting. But this is Professor Hill. It's a short video for our class, which has no control over the lighting. Sorry about all that. I guess we get to look at the beautiful bay. But yeah, this is looking down the coastline and looking at in the far distance right there is a little tiny sheep island, and this is near the harbor of Ballycastle. Anyway, it's a beautiful place, and sorry about not sure I can do the up close lighting. It's trying but not working very well. There we go. uh, so it turns out that yeah, I'll try that. It won't work. Anyway, I'll talk fast. That's the key. So it turns out that this is Professor Hill. Today, what is today? It was Thursday the 17th. That's right. And Thursday the 17th of July, 2025. And I'm losing track of time here already. Here at Corrymeela, the Peace and Reconciliation Center in Ballycastle, Northern Ireland, where I'm with a group of students from San Antonio. And they're here doing a study abroad in Ireland. So, but we still have our class. And so we are still working away. And so I'm going to make a few comments this morning about the case study. I had mentioned it yesterday. And this is the one about the student's cartoon. It's an interesting question. I had mentioned that ethics is about big, important things and also about small, little things. And this one is kind of a question about, is this an ethical violation even at all? Because it's an unusual fact pattern where a student was doodling in class and in the middle of a long lecture. And then what happened was he began to draw a scene of a professor talking to a group of students, like a big lecture auditorium style, just like the one he was sitting in, where the student in the cartoon jumps up and says, "I can't take it anymore," and starts to shoot the professor. Now, again, it's a relatively violent image, but it's also just a hand-drawing cartoon. And the student takes it, because what happens is he's drawing as the professor's talking, class ends. Well, he gets up, walks out, and wads up the piece of paper and throws it away. But there had been another student behind him in this auditorium kind of style seating. And what happened was that student had looked over his shoulder and seen what he was drawing and was disturbed by it and said, "Oh my God, this guy is, planning on shooting our professor." So what he does is he followed him out after class, sees he throws it away. He reaches into the trash can and pulls it out, runs down to the professor and gives it to him and says, "That guy was drawing this in class." And the professor freaks out. The professor's like, "Oh my God, this guy's trying to kill me." So the professor goes to the dean and says, "This is a huge problem. You got to do something about this." And the dean says, I'll look into it." And sure enough, he calls the student in, because this student who's never had any problems before, great grades, just an outstanding student. Well, dean says, "Hey, look, did you draw this?" And the student is shocked because, remember, he threw it away. And he said, "Well, yes, I did draw that." He said, "But you need to know it's just a doodle. It's a nothing. I never meant anything by it. And in fact, how did you get it?" He said, "Well, somebody found it and turned it in. They were worried about you, blah, blah, blah." And he says, "Well, look, you know that I didn't mean any harm, because you just said I threw it away. I did not deliver this to the professor. I never gave it to them in a threatening way. I didn't post it someplace. And you can tell my intent by the fact that I threw it away." And the dean says, well, I'm going to look into this. And so I'll call you back and let you know. Well, of course, he looks into it, and that's exactly what happened. And the student had a good record, so he doesn't really think there's a threat. He doesn't think there's been a violation of the code of student conduct. So he calls the professor in and tells him that. He says, look, I think this is all overblown. Just let it go. I'm not going to worry about it. And the professor is not having it. He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, this student has threatened to kill me. The proof is in your hands. Look at it, man. And he's like, I can't believe you're not going to do something about this. So the professor is just like adamant. And so the dean's like, oh, for the love of God. Okay. By the way, that's when I got involved in the situation, which was that I think the dean was trying to pawn it off on me because there's a distinction between a violation of the code of student conduct, which is for behavior outside of the classroom and for, non-academic stuff, which is what I was handling at the time. And academic misconduct, like plagiarism or cheating on a test, that's all handled by the professors and the deans on the academic side of the house. Well, he came to me and said, what do you think about this case? And I looked at it and I told him, I agree with you. There's no violation here. This is the doodle in class. Was it a good idea? No. Did the student throw it away? Yes. And he said, yeah, but this guy really wants me, the professor really wants me to do something about it. I said, well, don't. And this is a big factor in this case, is when it was happening, which shouldn't matter at all, but it did. And that it was near the end of the semester. We were only like a 10 days away from the semester ending. And so the dean comes up with this plan where he's going to have his cake and eat it too, and calls the student in and says, look, this is bad. You shouldn't have drawn this, and it looks dangerous, and the professor's all worried. So what I'm going to do is put you on probation and academic suspension. And the student is, and this is interesting to me because it tells you how long ago this happened. The student was like, whatever you think is most appropriate. The student's like, absolutely, whatever you say, I'll do. Now the student would have just reached in his pocket, pulled out a phone, and called a lawyer. But anyway, but then the dean explains to him, look, you're going to be on suspension for this semester. And then the way this works is you have to be out for a semester and you can apply to come back in. Well, this is a spring semester. You'll be out over the summer and then you can come back in the fall. And the student's like, oh, great. Because, I already have summer plans anyway. And, but he said, well, what about my exams? And Dean's like, don't worry about it. Just take the rest of your exams. That's no problem. And this one class, I'll have someone other than your professor be your proctor and give you an exam. So you'll still, it won't interfere even with the class where the professor is all upset. Student's like, well, you're being more than generous. Thank you. And so the student, now on academic suspension, leaves, and he calls the professor in and says to the professor, I took you seriously. I tossed that student out of here. He's on academic suspension. And the professor is relieved. I was like, oh, thank God you did something about this. So he, and again, I think the dean really thought that this was a case of, me finding the perfect, middle ground. I walked the tightrope right down the middle. And in a sense, he was able to make the professor happy. I'm taking it seriously. And even the student who was suspended but still took his exams was just gone over the summer, like he'd planned to be gone over the summer anyway, and then came back in the fall. By the way, student did go on suspension. They did come back in the fall. They did graduate. There was no long-term impacts from that. But let me stop there for a second. Let me say this, though, which is a major factor. Uh, Still always going to have an academic suspension on a record. Still going to have to answer questions about that. If somebody, employers or graduate schools, any of that kind of stuff, it matters. They ask. And more importantly, I think it was like the dean kind of latched onto the solution, the sanction, the punishment, and thought, ooh, this is good. And then backed up from that to a violation of the code. You really want to have sanctions be an appropriate response to violations of the code of student conduct or the academic conduct. And the dean didn't think there had been a violation, but then kind of became enamored of this penalty. So started there and then backed up, which is the wrong way to do it. Listen, if I told the dean, I said, look, if you don't think there's a violation here, then just drop it. You can't give a student a punishment anyway. But that's kind of what happened. I don't think it was a good case. I think it was a sad, bad case. I think it ended up having not that big of an impact on the student, which was the intent. I think it made the professor happy, which was the intent. But I'm curious what you think about it as an ethics violation. Was the student in the wrong? Was the dean in the wrong? Should I have said more? I mean, there's a lot going on here. So let me know what you think about that. I'll talk to y'all again soon. So I'm going to sign off today. I got work to go do. But I'll leave you here with the seagulls and the sailboat going by, and just leave you with a minute of the sound of seagulls, who of course now gone completely quiet. All right, take care. I'll talk to y'all again soon. Bye-bye.